Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to Broly 555 TV, and welcome to the very first ever video game review video that I have ever done. Never thought I would be doing these type of videos ever at any point in my content creation career, but well, here we are. Recently, I came across a football game that I really like as far as my interest in it goes, and I actually enjoyed playing it after I downloaded it to my Xbox One. And as a matter of fact, even though the game is not perfect and definitely has a lot of flaws, I like it so much that I actually wanted to do an honest review of it. The game, of course, if you're looking at the title and thumbnail of this video, is none other than Maximum Football 2020, which, as you can see here on screen, is available on Xbox One. You can buy it for $30 to download either on your Xbox One or your PlayStation 4 if you have one of those. Maximum Football is an indie game made by Canuck Play Incorporated and Spear Interactive. Because they're an indie developer, they don't have much money to work with as far as a budget goes. So the fact that they can put out a football game that's any good is actually pretty remarkable. What separates Maximum Football 2020, though, from something like Access Football, which is another indie developer-made football game that's an alternative to Madden, what makes Maximum Football different is that Maximum Football caters to the college football and the Canadian Football League crowds. And without any further ado, let's get into the review of Maximum Football 2020. Let's take a look at the pros and the cons of Maximum Football 2020. We'll start by talking about the pros, the good things about Maximum Football 2020. As I mentioned earlier, Maximum Football 2020 is a game that caters to both college football and Canadian football. If you go to the customization menu of the game, you'll find that there are different league options. You can play the 9-team league, the 10-team league, the 16-team league, the 27-team league, the 32-team league, or the 130-team league. If you select the 130-team league, what you get is you get all of the NCAA Division I football teams, or at least the fictitious versions of them that Canuck Play made. And of course, if you select other leagues, you have fewer teams to play with, and one of the leagues will actually create a bunch of professional Canadian football teams. And when you go to the rules of the game, you can switch between playing by NFL rules, by NCAA Division I college football rules, or you can play by Canadian football rules. And when you play the game by Canadian football rules, it turns the field into a 110-yard field instead of 100. And of course, the sidelines are further out, the field's wider, and of course, you have the other Canadian football rules such as no fair catching and only having 3 downs to get a first instead of 4. Stuff like that you see in Canadian football. As a matter of fact, the Canadian football element of the game is so popular that Doug Flutie himself, who's probably the most famous Canadian football player of all time, he signed on to this game and allowed himself to be part of their branding. So Maximum Football, if you're into Canadian football, is something you absolutely want to play because there is no other Canadian football game on the market. And if you're into college football, Maximum Football is something that you should be interested in because it's the only college football game on the market. The fictitious teams that are made for this game are very similar to the fictitious teams that were made for Access Football and its franchise, which they were fictitious spin-offs of all the NFL teams plus a couple of customized ones that they made just for the game. Other good points about Maximum Football 2020 is that for an indie studio with almost no budget, they had relatively good player models, especially if you compared it to their Access Football counterpart. The player models for an indie game were actually very good. And they had relatively smooth player animations and surprisingly good player physics. You can really see this when you're got a star running back or a star wide receiver in a one-on-one matchup, or he's got an open field with defenders chasing him down. And if your receiver or your running back is big and strong enough and has enough forward momentum going, defenders will literally bounce off the guy like a pinball machine. And it can actually be quite awesome to see yourself bust an 80-yard touchdown run because 3 tacklers bounced off of you when you were turning the corner at the line of scrimmage. So the player animations and the player physics are really good, as well as the player models. And the stadium models for an indie game are relatively solid. They're really nice to look at for an indie game. But because of the smooth player animations and player physics, the gameplay as a result is more realistic, because you have pretty good icon passing, you have pretty good run blocking, and the running back moves and the wide receiver moves in open field as far as spins and jukes and hurdling over defenders, those are relatively good too. If you get the controls nailed down, you can really go to town on some people. And speaking of controls, another good point is that you can customize the controls of the game with the button mapping feature in the customization menu. Furthermore, because the game uses all fictitious teams that are spin-offs of the real-life teams, the game has a sandbox approach and allows you to have top-notch customization. You can customize every team as far as their school colors, their names, their mascot, their logos. You can even make your own logos with their logo creator. You can customize each and every single one of the players and their attributes. There's even a play designer feature in the game that literally allows you to design your own football plays that you can then put into your playbooks and roll them out on the field in games, which, as far as I'm aware, that's something that's not in any other football game on the market right now, and I'm not sure that's ever been a thing in any football game in the past. There's also a practice mode in this game, which is very handy if you're trying to learn the controls of the game and how players operate and all that, and that's actually a feature that Access Football does not have. With a game like Access Football, you have to do a bunch of exhibition and play now games to figure out the control scheme and how everything works. But with Maximum Football, you have a practice mode where you can figure all that stuff out before you get into a real game. Another positive feature of the game is that when you are in the middle of a play now game or some game, but you have to leave the game for whatever reason, it'll actually save your progress, and then when you load up the game next time, there will be a continue button that you can pick, and it'll take you right back to that game that you left and were in the middle of, and it'll take you right back to the point where you left, and you can finish playing the game from where you left off. So as you can see, there are a lot of positive things I can say about Maximum Football 2020. Let's get into the cons, however. If you play this game, you will realize very quickly that there is literally no color commentary. There are no broadcasters providing color commentary during the game, which is something that you get in every other football game that's ever been done, whether it be the games by 989 Sports or EA Sports or 2K games. And even Access Football does a fairly solid job with color commentary over the gameplay. But Maximum Football 2020 does not have color commentary. Another thing you'll notice playing the game is that there are almost no player sounds on the field, like the sounds of players grunting and groaning and trying to shed blocks and trying to block people, like all the cool sound effects you would hear in the NCAA football series. Those are not present here in Maximum Football 2020. That and the sounds that are there, such as crowd noise, referee sounds, a PA guy telling you, 7-yard gain on the play, it's now 2nd and 3, and all that stuff. Even those sounds that they do have are very quiet and very underwhelming. And another flaw related to that is that you can't adjust the audio levels of the game. You can't adjust menu sounds, player sounds, broadcaster sounds, PA sounds, crowd sounds. You can't edit the audio levels of any of the sounds to make up for its quiet nature. Another flaw in the game that's annoying is that you cannot substitute players in-game. Unlike every other football game where you hit the pause button and you have an option of a depth chart and being able to substitute players in and out at your leisure or at your whim, Maximum Football 2020 does not allow you to actually do that. Another flaw with the game is that you are not able to view individual stats for players in the middle of your game or even after you've finished playing the game. When you are in the middle of the game and when you finish the game, you're able to look at a few of your overall team stats, but you're not able to actually view your player individual stats. So you can't see how your quarterback did on the day. You can't see how your running back did on the day or how your receivers did on the day. Something that's in every other football game on the planet, not in this one, unfortunately. Something that you really need to have in a football game. Another problem with the game is that because of how easy it is for good wide receivers and skill players in general to break tackles and bust out huge plays in the game, it's too easy to return kickoffs for touchdowns or bust 75, 80-yard touchdown runs with your star running back. There was actually a game I was playing where I returned 3 kickoffs for touchdowns with one guy. That's something that is amazing to pull off, but it was not very hard. I literally just had to veer. I had to start in the middle of the field, and I just veered hard one direction or the other, and I could outrun the coverage and bust a touchdown. Like, there was no skill involved whatsoever with returning kickoffs for touchdowns. And if you can break through that line of scrimmage, it's pretty easy to bust giant touchdown runs if you got a star running back who's powerful and fast. When it comes to scoring games, I break it down into 5 categories: gameplay, graphics, sound, presentation, and replay value. So for Maximum Football 2020, I give the gameplay a 6 out of 10. The game physics for players and player animations are very smooth, and they actually give you a sense of power and authority and skill when you're a running back or a wide receiver and you're able to bust moves and break tackles and bust out huge plays. And if your defense is lined up right, you can actually make some pretty good defensive stops on people as well. Unfortunately, because it's too easy to bust out huge runs for touchdowns on the running game or the passing game or on special teams, I can only give the gameplay a 6 out of 10. For graphics, I give the game a 7 out of 10, and those of you watching might be thinking that's way too high of a score to give it. It looks like something from the mid-2000s PS2 world. But Canuck Play, the studio that made Maximum Football 2020, is an indie studio with almost no budget. So I have to consider the budget they're working with when I rate the game and its graphics and its player models and its gameplay and all that. And for the budget they're operating on, I thought the player models and the stadium models for Maximum Football 2020 were actually pretty good for an indie game. They're not great for an indie game, but they're pretty good. For the sound rating, I gave Maximum Football 2020 a 3 out of 10, and let's face it, this is a very underwhelming football game in terms of audio. The crowds are quiet, the whistles of the referees are quiet, the PA guy's quiet, you can't raise their audio levels, and there's almost no other player sounds on the field, so it feels like you're at some kind of practice scrimmage with a bunch of mimes. As far as replay value goes, I give Maximum Football 2020 a 7 out of 10. Because in terms of the game modes, you have Play Now, and you have Season Mode, you have a Practice Mode, you have a Dynasty Mode that's very similar to the Dynasty modes of the NCAA football series, so you got recruiting and all that jazz. It's actually very good and well developed, just like the NCAA football games are. So there's actually a lot of replay value to get out of this game if you can get over the bad sounds. And when you factor in the Canadian football element of Maximum Football 2020, there's a lot of replay value in Maximum Football 2020 just for that reason. Canadian football fans wanting to play a game that does Canadian football rules, they're going to flock to a game like Maximum Football 2020. So that's why I give its replay value a 7 out of 10. As far as the presentation of the game goes, I give it a 6 out of 10. When you look at the menus and the loading screens of the game, they're pretty okay. They're kind of similar to the old menu layouts and loading screens of the old NCAA football games, but they don't have the sharp, bold presentation of games like Access Football. So I give the presentation of the game a 6 out of 10. And when you add up all those numbers, divide by 5, I give Maximum Football 2020 a final score of 5.8 out of 10. So as you guys can see, as much as I like Maximum Football 2020, I had no choice but to give it a score of 5.8 out of 10, which means that Maximum Football 2020 is a mediocre game that is this close to being an average video game. Now, some of you may think the score I gave Maximum Football 2020 was too high, but as I said earlier, this was an indie game made by an indie studio with almost no budget. The fact that they're able to put out a football game that's any good at all by modern standards is actually pretty good. So there was a lot to like about the game, but there's just some parts that are so bad that I just can't ignore it, and especially with the sounds of the game, as far as the lack of player sounds, the underwhelming referee sounds, and the underwhelming crowd sounds, and the complete lack of any kind of color commentary. If this game had color commentary and it had better player sounds and it had better crowd and referee sounds, I would have given this game a way higher score, but it is what it is. Now, I wish I could say that I hope that Canuck Play takes all of these suggestions and criticisms into advisement and puts out a better product next year, but unfortunately, there won't be a next year or a this year for Maximum Football. There will not be a Maximum Football 2021 because back in May, we found out that the Maximum Football studio and the game franchise was canceled. They had to shut down. As you can see here, I have an article from June 30th, 2021 titled Maximum Football Cancels, Studio Shuts Down. The article says, some major late-breaking news from the sports gaming world as Doug Flutie's Maximum Football from Canuck Play has been canceled. The announcement came from Canuck Play founder David Winter on Wednesday evening from the game's official Discord. At this time, development of the title has been suspended and the company itself has been put on hiatus, Winter said in the statement. He added in the announcement that there were many reasons for the decision to end development, including his health after working 7 days a week for months on end. The ability for a small team to keep up development of such a large and complex title combined with the never-ending changes in technology in the gaming industry just make continuing untenable, he said. Add that to the other larger studios invading our space and it made little sense to continue. Effective immediately, the studio behind the game, Canuck Play, has ceased all operations. On top of that, the entirety of the game's IP, including source code, is now for sale. So there's not going to be a Maximum Football 2021 this year, and this means that Maximum Football 2020 is, unfortunately, the last game in the franchise. This actually saddens me greatly because not only was this the one football game that Canadian football fans were interested in because of the part of the game that allowed them to play Canadian football, but this was also a devastating blow to me because I was a huge fan of EA Sports NCAA football series back in the day before it shut down in 2014. And when I found out about Maximum Football 2020, I was excited because we finally had a college football game and franchise on the market. We actually had a football game that college football fans could get excited about because it's college football. College football video game fans of the past desperately want a college football game like Maximum Football 2020. Unfortunately, though, we're not going to get a next iteration of this game unless some gaming studio wants to buy up the source code for Maximum Football and continue the franchise with their studio and make the improvements to it that need to be made. Hopefully that will happen, and one day we'll be able to talk about new entries in the Maximum Football series. But for now, Maximum Football 2020 is the last game in the franchise, and Maximum Football 2020, despite all the flaws it has and all the work that needs to be done to make it a good football game, I really enjoyed playing it. Thank you for watching this awesome gaming video on Broly 555 TV. If you liked what you saw, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel, check out our other videos, and be sure to leave your likes and comments down below. If you would like to follow Broly 555 TV on other social media sites, I would encourage you to check out our Creation Social page. You can follow us at our Gab account. You can subscribe to our Minds channel. You can follow us on CGN. And you can follow us on Game Jolt. The links to all of those being in the description box below. Thank you for watching and have an excellent day.